This is data on the number of jobs open in the United States in January of 2021, last month, versus January of 2020, which was pre-pandemic. 13% more jobs are open now than they were a year ago. And we went through the pandemic and a lot of people lost their jobs. And what's happened is truck drivers, logistics, nurses, healthcare workers, managers, software engineers, salespeople are growing in demand. And that means that we're going to have to take an even better care of the people we have, because it's going to be harder to replace them. We also obviously live and work in virtual environments now. It's very significant and very common for me to talk to heads of HR, and they say to me, oh yeah, homework is now part of our ongoing policy for work experience. We're going to have a hybrid model. You saw probably the announcement from Salesforce last week. Most of the tech companies have already decided they're going to create new pay models to accommodate people working in lower cost of living locations on a more permanent basis. We also now have the rise of health and fitness and well-being as not just a benefit, but really a strategic initiative. In fact, in most of the conversations we have with heads of leadership development or learning or HR, they say well-being is really a capability of leadership to understand how to create a safe and healthy workplace. When we look at that, and we're in the middle of publishing a research report on what we call human-centered leadership, what we find, and most of you probably know this, is that the world of work today requires a new level of empathy, flexibility, forgiveness, humility, and listening. And so a lot of the psychological behaviors that create happiness are becoming business behaviors and business competencies and business capabilities. This chart, I have a big article about it on my website, comes from a meeting I had 2 years ago at University of California, Berkeley, with a bunch of CHROs, where we had the head of the Greater Good Science Center talk about their research on happiness. And what they basically discovered is that these are the things that create happiness. And when we showed these words to heads of HR, I asked them, this is pre-pandemic, so it was a little bit different. How many of you use these types of ideas in your corporate capability models, your leadership models, your corporate mission? And very, very few, teamwork obviously is in there. Well, now they're becoming, critical. And so we have to find ways to listen, adapt, communicate, and empathize with people. In a world where services are most of what your company does, and I mean engineering, design, consulting, customer service, sales, those are all service jobs, actually. Your ability to listen and communicate is critical to your success. And from an HR standpoint, we need to adopt it in HR. We can't assume that everything we do is going to take a year or two, and then when it gets rolled out, we'll tell people about it. We need to be listening and communicating to them on a regular basis, and we need to localize what we do to the geographies, business units, or job roles that are relevant to the employees themselves. And that's creating a much more resilient, adaptive operating model for HR, which of course pushes the issue of how do we implement a communication infrastructure that enables that. Now, I mentioned the research on services. Let me just show you this to sort of get your sense of what's been happening. This is a little bit old, this chart, but if you look at the update to it, it continues. This is we're living in the increasingly information-centric, data and product and really automation-centric economy that's been going on for decades. Most of many of the HR practices that we bring with us today were designed in, GE or the manufacturing economy when companies were hierarchical and we had management and labor, and the labor did the work and the manager defined and sort of directed the work. That's not really what happens anymore at work. Everybody's working, everybody's leading. leaders are part-time managers and part-time workers. We work on multiple functions, multiple teams. And if we don't take care of people, the company doesn't operate well. Some studies came out last year and they're continuing to come out about burnout. And, now that we're all connected to our computers and our video and our phones, and we have the uncertainty of the pandemic, people are getting burnt out. And so, what our research is finding is that benefits are not going to solve this, but listening solves to it, and communications. And so you need to think about your job as one of listening and responding, not necessarily designing and just pushing things onto the workforce. One of the things that that epidemiologists talk a lot about in their domain is humility, because viruses are unpredictable. And, we have multiple variants of the coronavirus now that nobody predicted. So they focus on being humble and listening and paying attention to the data. Well, we have the same issue at work. How people respond to unpredictable events is not clear. So we need a system that not only communicates outward, but communicates inward. So the whole communications issue in work is becoming really kind of a central part of our role in HR and our role in leadership. And now we're in a world of designing experiences for success. And we're not just doing it in HR. What we now know, for those of you that work in employee experience, whether it be in HR and IT or in marketing or another part of the company, is that this is not just an HR issue. It's not just an IT issue. It really crosses all of the functional areas of the company, as you can see in the bottom of this chart. So the Maslow's hierarchy issues are on the left, but the functional areas are on the bottom. So what we really have here is a multidimensional problem of listening and communicating to employees to address many of the issues I'm showing here, and then not only communicating to the employees, but listening to the employees and responding. And we've studied this a lot. We're publishing a big report on this. It'll be out in Q2. There are at least 24 topics that you will want to think about in your employee experience. You won't be dealing with all of these all the time, and they tend to blow hot and cold depending on the company, depending on the employee, depending on the workforce segment and the location. But if you're not communicating to people, you don't know where the problems are. And so the center of employee communications is listening, is using information coming from employees, managers, and stakeholders in the company, capturing information from performance reviews, from email, from open surveys, and responding to it. And that's really what's going on in a communication. Now, as the people in Poppulo will tell you, the problem we have in employee communications is that in a lot of companies, there isn't a single owner, or maybe it's owned by marketing, or maybe it's owned by the CEO, or maybe it's owned by HR, but we have kind of a complicated problem. Just like with customers, we have many channels of communication, and it keeps expanding, by the way. There's no end to the tools for customer communications. When I was, early in my career, we used to do mail, direct mail, and we would have events. We would go down the road and we would have breakfast meetings or, physical events. And then of course we had email, and then we had social media, and now we have YouTube and, podcasting and, dozens of ways to reach people on their phones. And pretty soon it'll be their watches. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have embedded chips in our bodies, a few years from now. I have the same problems with employees. And some of your employees are mobile, some of your employees are in retail locations, some of your employees are in manufacturing plants. So you need to think about this employee experience thing as a multi-channel communications problem that needs to be brought together. And, and there are many forms of communications. There's, quick updates, there's, open enrollment, there's new programs, new strategies, training. And so what's going on now in communications, and the reason that Poppulo is such a fast growing company, is, we need a new infrastructure to manage this. Now, Microsoft is big into this too. for those of you that are interested in Microsoft stuff, this last week, a week ago, Microsoft announced a tool set called Viva, which is essentially Microsoft opening up its infrastructure to support and assist tools like Poppulo in employee communications. So it's getting easier. It's still a project and it still takes infrastructure, but I think in most big companies, the better you communicate, the better the company will operate. And this has been going on, in sort of an era. A lot of the communications in companies go back to surveys and pulse surveys and action plans and dashboards. I think the really valuable issues in communication are feedback, not just communicating out, but listening and understanding who's reading what, who's responding to what, in what parts of the workforce are we getting low adoption and high adoption of some new strategy. That's really where the action is in making your company better on a continuous basis. For every employee issue, for every channel of communication, there's an owner. It's at least those groups at the bottom: HR, IT, finance, facilities, security, travel, mobility. In a lot of companies, there's local versions of that in Europe, in Asia, in Japan, in China. And so, we need kind of a strategy and really sort of a platform that allows us to communicate with people from different functional areas. And that's, to me, why platforms like Poppulo are so important, because they're really enterprise class communication infrastructure to deal with this multi-headed problem where we have multiple constituents in the employee base and multiple service providers and owners of different parts of the employee experience on the bottom. Let me add one more, sort of important thing to think about. When you look at the business performance of the highest performing companies, there's also something else going on: inclusion. And I don't mean DEI. I mean, we just published last week a really significant research report on DEI, and I encourage you to go to our website, go to joshbersin.com, and you'll see it there. But understanding the the sort of human belonging issues at work. Every study that was done in 2020 on engagement found that the number one driver of engagement today is a sense of belonging, a feeling that I can go to work, whether it be virtual or physical, and I feel that people care about me. I feel that my differences are respected, that I belong and fit into this company. We did a study on this in 2017 and looked at 80 or more talent practices and found that the highest performing companies have a data-driven, inclusive approach to everything: recruiting, onboarding, job assignment, promotion, pay, performance management, career development, part-time, full-time, constantly thinking about inclusion. So one of the things that's been going on in HR in a big way in the last couple of years, and it's really picked up speed this year, is creating a sense of equity and fairness, diversity and citizenship across everything that we do. And I'm sure that's part of your communication strategy. I'm sure that's part of your engagement strategy, but it needs to be part of your HR strategy as well. It needs to touch everything.